In 1922, a team of construction workers sealed a door inside a building in Vienna, and the man who placed the final brick later refused to ever speak about what he heard before he did it. 3 other workers quit that same afternoon. No explanation. No notice. They simply put down their tools and walked away. For over 100 years, the door stayed sealed. What the records uncovered when researchers finally went looking changes the entire story. Part 1. The building before the door. The building at the center of this story wasn't unusual on the outside. It was a post-war administrative structure on the edge of Vienna's inner city. Solid walls. Arched windows. The kind of place that looks like it was built to last forever and never be noticed. In the early months of 1922, a renovation crew was brought in. Their job was straightforward: reinforce the interior walls, update the lower corridor, seal off a section of the basement level that was no longer being used. Simple work. Routine. Except nothing about this job stayed routine for long. The crew foreman, a man named Ernst Halder, documented the project in a private journal that his granddaughter donated to a historical archive in 1987. That journal sat in a box, barely catalogued, for another 2 decades before a researcher named Daniel Frayne stumbled across it in 2009. What Frayne found inside that journal is what started everything. Because Halder didn't just write about bricks and mortar. He wrote about the door. Part TWO, the first day something felt wrong. According to Halder's entries, the crew reached the lower corridor on the 4th day of work. The corridor itself was strange. It ran deeper into the building than the architectural plan suggested it should. The walls were damp. The air was cold in a way that didn't match the season. Halder noted that 2 of his workers immediately said they didn't want to work down there. He dismissed it. Men got superstitious on old jobs. It wasn't unusual. But then they reached the door. It was wooden. Dark, heavy timber. Unremarkable except for one detail Halder couldn't explain: the door had been locked from the inside. No handle on the outside. No keyhole. Just a flat surface of old wood set into the stone wall. Whatever was in that room had been sealed in, not sealed out. Halder's orders were clear: brick it up, don't open it. He didn't know who had given that instruction or why. He'd received it in writing from the building's administration office. No signature. Just an order. So he began the work. And that's when the first of them heard it. Part 3. What they heard. A worker named Joseph, Halder never uses his last name in the journal, was the first. He was pressing mortar along the lower edge of the door frame when he stopped. He stood up slowly, turned to Halder, and said, very quietly, "There is breathing on the other side." Halder didn't believe him. He put his own ear to the door. He wrote about this moment in careful, restrained language. But the restraint makes it worse. He wrote, it was rhythmic. It was not the building settling. It was not pipes. I have heard breathing before. This was breathing. He pulled back. Told Joseph to keep working. They had orders. The door stays sealed. But here's what makes this more than a ghost story. Because what happened next has a paper trail. Part 4. The paper trail. When Frayne began investigating the journal in 2009, he didn't just take Halder's word for it. He went to the Vienna City Archive. He pulled the building records for that address going back to 1880. And he found something that Halder himself may never have known. The room behind that door had been used between 1909 and 1919 as a private medical holding space. The building had briefly served as an auxiliary facility during the First World War. Patients, some of them suffering from severe psychological trauma, had been housed in the lower level. When the war ended, the building was transferred back to civilian administration. But the records for that specific room designation L7, went silent in 1919. No transfer of patients. No official closure. No record of the room being emptied. It simply stopped appearing in documents. As if someone had decided the easiest way to deal with whatever was in that room was to stop acknowledging it existed. And then in 1922, 3 years later, someone gave the order to brick it up. No name. No signature. No reason given. Frayne applied for access to the administrative correspondence from that period. He was told the relevant files had been, and this is the exact language used, misfiled and are not currently locatable. But the strangest part was still to come. Part 5, The Decades of Sound. Here's where the story shifts. Because the door being sealed in 1922 wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning of something else. Over the following decades, staff who worked in the building reported sounds coming from the lower corridor. Not dramatic sounds. Not screaming. Nothing that would make headlines. Just the occasional knock. A slow, irregular rhythm against the wall. Sometimes once. Sometimes 3 or 4 times. Then nothing for weeks. The account spanned from the 1930s all the way to 1978, when the building underwent another renovation and workers were given explicit instructions, again in writing, again unsigned, not to disturb the sealed section of the lower corridor. One of those 1978 workers spoke to a local journalist in 1994. He said that on the second day of working near that wall, he heard what sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across the other side of the brick. He said he went home that night and called his priest. Now, a rational person hears all of this and starts building explanations. Old buildings settle. Pipes contract and expand. Acoustics in stone corridors do strange things. All true. But here's the detail that the rational explanations struggle with. Part 6, The Measurement. In 2011, Frayne was granted limited access to the building for a structural assessment. He brought with him a thermal imaging unit and an acoustic sensor, the kind used to detect voids behind walls in construction surveys. He found the sealed section without difficulty. The wall where the door had been was still there, the brickwork visually distinct from the surrounding stone, newer, slightly different in color even after 90 years. He ran the acoustic sensor along the surface. Behind approximately 4 feet of brick and older stonework, the sensor detected a void. Roughly the size of a mid-sized room. Consistent with the L7 designation in the old records. So far, so logical. A room is a room. But then Frayne ran the thermal imaging. And the temperature reading inside that void was, consistently, across 3 separate scans, 2.3 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding structure. In a sealed, underground room with no heating, no ventilation, no known energy source. 2.3 degrees warmer. He ran the test again the next day. Same result. He submitted his findings to 2 independent engineers. Both confirmed the readings were accurate. Neither could offer an explanation for the heat differential. One of them, and Frayne quotes this directly in his published account, said simply, "Something in that space is generating warmth." I cannot tell you what. Part 7, the final record. Frayne published his research in 2013 in a small historical journal. It got very little attention at the time. But buried in his footnotes was something he almost didn't include. While cross-referencing the 1919 patient records, he found a single discharge note for the L7 room. 1 patient. Transferred out in October 1919. The patient's name had been redacted. The condition listed was a phrase that translates roughly from the German as persistent survival reflex, environmental unresponsiveness. The transferring physician's note at the bottom of the page read, "Patient remains. Will not leave. Has not eaten in 11 days. Vital signs present. Origin of warmth in room unknown." That was the last official record of room L7. 3 years later, they bricked up the door. And somewhere in the basement of that building in Vienna, if Frane's thermal readings are right, something is still keeping that room just slightly warmer than it should be. The door has never been reopened. Nobody has ever explained why. And the question that stays with me, the one I can't shake, is this: when Ernst Halder placed that final brick in 1922, and heard the breathing stop, was it because whatever was behind that door had finally gone quiet? Or was it because it had finally realized no one was coming? If this story made you feel something you can't quite name, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe to Nocturne Files. New cases, every week. The light is optional.